This show has been a whole lot of fun for 6 weeks and now going on our 6th edition here for the Voice of College Football, USC Trojans Live. Come on in, hit the like button before you do anything, and then leave those comments and questions. We got Matt Zemek on the line. He's the guy that makes this work each and every Tuesday with you. You can join Matt's work at Trojans Wire. Matt, how you doing today?
Doing well, and as I told you off the air before we came on, there's a cold front sweeping through Phoenix. It's 101 degrees at 1 o'clock, and it's a cold front because 2 days ago it was 113. So 101, like we're praising the heavens down here.
I don't know if I've been in 113 before. I think I've touched it a few times in Mississippi. I know that there was a couple summers in particular. Yeah, it went over 110, but you've lived through it. I got a day or two. If you've lived at it in that, in stretches of 15 out of 30 days in a month, and it's just wow, that's toasty.
It is. And, if we talk about Arizona State later today, I mean, just like it's a miserable time of year, not just for the weather, but also for Arizona State football.
It is. We've been running a series, folks, where we're bringing on media from the Trojans' opponents in 2022. So check out those videos as we want to review the entire schedule and want to take a look at Arizona State today. We'll see if that comes together. Certainly much to talk about. We'll take your comments and questions as always. So let's get to the news of the day before we venture into some storylines. 3-star offensive tackle Tobias Raymond, who at this point would be the lowest ranked of the USC commits for 2023. He comes into the fold, Matt, out of Ventura, California at 6'7", 250.
I'm sure that he's going to be beefed up a little bit in the course of time. But the main point of significance here, West Coast college football recruiting expert Brandon Huffman made the note that, this is the first offensive lineman in the 2023 class. Now, of course, it's not a 5-star, and USC's had that long, well-publicized, well-noted drought in terms of getting a 5-star offensive lineman into the fold. But this is a building block. This is a building block for the offensive line in the 2023 class. It's obviously the position group where I think more than anything else, Lincoln Riley has to really make a name for himself being able to recruit at this position. Now, just for the sake of clarity, Mark, and everyone watching here on the Voice of College Football, for the 2022 team, I still think defensive line is where the most alarming deficiencies are, where the USC roster is the thinnest. So I just want to be clear about that defensive line for 2022, still the biggest area of need. But on a long-term level, big picture, looking at the next 3-4 years, it is offensive line where Lincoln Riley has to make the biggest splash in recruiting. And part of this, of course, is losing the Josh Connerly battle to Dan Lanning in Oregon. But mostly it's because USC used to bring in 5-star offensive line recruits and didn't do it under Clay Helton very often. And so that is where USC needs to hit home runs. And, of course, you have Caleb Williams, who's going to be playing 2 years at USC. Then you have Malachi Nelson, who's going to take the torch from Caleb Williams, most likely. So for the Cadillac quarterbacks that you have coming in to USC, you need Cadillac offensive linemen. So, Tobias Raymond, he's not a 5-star, but it's getting a result on the board, getting some momentum, establishing an identity. Lincoln Riley not having had a full recruiting cycle coming into USC as he did in late November, early December. But now you give him this full offseason, this full recruiting cycle, this full chance to really begin to make an imprint more on the recruiting trail, less in the transfer portal. Not that he won't disregard the transfer portal. He's still going to make use of that, of course. But this is the time to start hitting big on the recruiting trail. And so Tobias Raymond gets a result on the board and certainly develops positive momentum in that direction. That's the larger significance of this particular recruitment, in my estimation.
247 Sports going through, as I understand it, some rankings revisions here. They cycle through that several times a year where they will re-rank. They've got a not available on Tobias Raymond right now. And for anybody who doesn't get excited about 3-star athletes committing and signing at a place like USC, understand, yes, most of the impact high-end guys will be 4 and 5 stars, but go to Alabama or Ohio State or Georgia's classes. They're not all 4 and 5 stars. They have a number of 3 stars that either are program players that fill a role, play special teams. He's not going to play special teams as a 6'7" offensive tackle, but or are key backups, or there's plenty of 3 stars that are all conference players in the Power 5. So, and playing in the NFL. So, yes, you need the bulk of 4 and 5 stars to, of course, most likely they're going to be the stars, but plenty of 3 stars that become stars on the field in college football. So don't discount that.
Absolutely. And a couple obvious points to make on the heels of what you've just said, Mark. One, USC needs depth. USC needs bodies. It's not hugely stocked at offensive line, so you just need to begin to accumulate bodies. That's one thing. But the other thing is Clay Helton didn't develop players. Lincoln Riley does develop players. And also Lincoln Riley, you know that he and Josh Henson, the offensive line coach, that they're going to make a point about how, hey, we develop quality offensive lines here at USC. We did it at Oklahoma. So, establishing that kind of identity and also being able to develop those 3 stars into players who are even better than that 3-star ranking. Like, hey, you come to USC as a 3-star, you're going to leave as an NFL legitimate day 1 or day 2 NFL prospect, beginning to establish that identity, taking 3 stars, making the most out of them, assuming Lincoln Riley does that. And we have every confidence that he's going to do precisely that at USC. That will establish an NFL draft identity where USC is going to leave behind the Clay Helton disaster, and you're going to see USC stuff that top 100 the first 2 days of the draft with lots of selections. And this is a point about the NFL draft that's worth revisiting because, we need to make light of this. And it's going to be a selling point for Lincoln Riley if he can deliver the goods. And that is, it wasn't so much lacking the first round choices because we saw Austin Jackson, we saw Elijah Vera Tucker. It was really on day 2, just that total absence of, volume of picks from number 35 to 100. That's where the Clay Helton, the barren, empty nature of his NFL draft classes really emerged in full. That's where Alabama and Ohio State and other similar programs, they just have a guy being called like every 8, 9, 10 spots. I mean, that was Georgia in particular in this draft. There was a Georgia Bulldog going off the board once every 10 picks or so. That's what USC needs to get back to. That's what Lincoln Riley and Alex Grinch need to establish. So it's really with those 3 stars, not the best of the best of the best, because they'll go in the first round. Like, that's not the concern. It's getting a lot of representation in the top 100, getting 8 or 9 picks the first 2 days of the draft. That's part of how a program, well, on one hand, it builds quality depth, but then makes its name really known the way Bama, Georgia, and Ohio State have done. Also LSU in the last 4 or 5 NFL drafts.
Folks, this is the 6th week of our USC show that we deliver here, courtesy Matt Zemek from Trojans Wire. Get on over to Trojans Wire. Check out Matt's work covering USC football, and this show gets better and better and better each week. So please bring in some folks with you, because it's not just USC fans here, but fans of all fan bases represented in college football. In the live chat, bring your comments and questions as we talk USC. And of course, the weeks are going to get closer and closer to the season, and more important as we get toward Pac-12 media days and then into August camp as well. We've had a series running where we're looking at opponents on the 2022 schedule. Check out those previous live streams. And today we're featuring the Sun Devils of Arizona State. We've got Michelle Gardner on the line from Arizona Republic. Michelle, it's great to see you.
Always good to see you too, Mark.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We understand you've had a bit of relief today on the thermometer, just a little bit.
Just a little. Just a little. I mean, now this time of year, we're talking triple digits and 114 and 15. So if it's 110, it's not bad.
Okay, Michelle, Arizona State football, typically a contender in the Pac-12, but a lot of news coming out of Tempe during the offseason, mostly not for the best of reasons, but a lot of uncertainty surrounding the program with the NCAA investigations and so forth. So I am going to just kind of leave it wide open for you to just kind of give a outline of where the football program stands heading into 2022. And then I'm going to cut Matt loose because he's a Pac-12 guy as well, because I think I can kick back and learn a ton from you two chopping it up Arizona State and USC. So Michelle, just your thoughts about where the program stands and what we may see unfold here in the next few months off the field, possibly.
Well, I guess the first thing everybody wants to know why Herm still has a job. And I address it this way. If you get rid of Herm, who do you bring in? Who from the outside would want to jump on this train wreck that this program is right now? So what are the chances you're going to get a good, viable candidate from the outside? I don't think there is one. So now the second option is, what about guys on staff that you might give the interim label to? Well, they've got a lot of new coaches. They don't have that guy that's been Herm's right-hand man for a number of years. So that you really don't, I mean, the longest tenured coach on the staff is the special teams coach, Sean Slocum, who predates Herm. You want him to be the head coach? I just don't know that there's another option that's better. And from the players that I've talked to, the players still support Herm. So I think for the sake of some consistency in the program and the fact that Herm still has the backing of his players, I think you just have to ride it out for now and see where this thing goes.
So Michelle, I'm a Phoenix native, and I'm back in Phoenix now. I spent some time in Seattle, but I've lived in the Pac-12 footprint all my life, and but being in Phoenix as I have been, the real head scratcher for me is, why hasn't Michael Crow fired Ray Anderson? Because we all know that Ray Anderson and his hire of Herm Edwards, the two were joined at the hip. Their success was going to be together. And so with the program, obviously waiting for the NCAA to potentially drop the hammer, why not clean house? I'm like, why do you wait for the NCAA to do its thing with Ray Anderson still in charge? So I think what you said is very much on point. It makes sense that you're not going to get a quality replacement, but the Ray Anderson piece of this, don't you have to clean house there and say this program, athletic program, is being mismanaged, and we at least have to get someone else in charge of running the whole program? And I would have to think that Arizona State struggles in terms of getting an NIL donor collective, getting boosters on board, that Ray Anderson is really the obstacle there more than Herm.
Absolutely. And I think ASU being behind the curve when it comes to this NIL thing, it's hard to tell donors and boosters, hey, come give money to us, when they're not behind the guy running the program. So it's kind of like one problem and another problem that's compounded. But I just think that they're going to ride this thing out. I agree. Most people wanted the plug pulled on Ray a long time ago. Ray won't pull the plug on Herm. He just isn't going to do that.
Of course. He's his guy. Yeah.
No, absolutely. But I just think that they're going to see where this thing goes. And with Ray Anderson, there are things more than just the football program. There are, don't even get me started about some of the things that we could go into as far as why Ray maybe shouldn't be there anymore. But, and today the academic success rate came out, and ASU's #1 in the Pac-12 ahead of Stanford. So, they're waving that thing right now. They're waving that flag right now as much as they can wave it. But I think they just want to ride this thing out and see where this thing goes with this investigation. And I think that's kind of when heads will roll at that point.
Do you have any idea of when the NCAA might announce penalties and when and what the timetable might be for that? And perhaps if people are uncertain of that, just what's a way to read the tea leaves and get a sense of when the NCAA might be showing its hand?
Well, there's some word that we might hear the notice of allegations by late fall, like maybe after the season. But who knows? Did we ever get a resolution to the University of Arizona basketball situation, which is about, if my memory serves me correct, are we on about 4 or 5 years of that? So who knows how long these things are going to take? I mean, I think a lot of ASU people want to know right now because they just want to get it over with. Throw it at us. Let us take our lumps and go from there. But as long as it's hanging in the wind, it's harder to recruit. It's hard to do this. It's harder to do that. So I think a lot of ASU faithful would rather just get their penalty now and be done with it.
One other question, just kind of looking back on the past several months at ASU athletics, it came as a surprise to me when Jaden Daniels initially said that he was staying with the program, but then of course he then transferred out. What was the backstory on that as to why Jaden Daniels first said he was going to stay? Like, he knew that the NCAA was waiting with its hammer and sickle, and that bad things were about to come down, and yet he made that initial commitment. I think that was the surprise, not that he transferred out. What was the backstory on that?
Well, absolutely. I 100% agree. Most of us were waiting for Jaden to jump ship long before that. He wasn't on the same page with Zach Hill. That was no secret. They never seemed to jive as far as the offense goes. And, he decided he was coming back. So most of us were shaking our heads. And then when Zach left, now you would think one of his biggest obstacles is now gone. That would lead him to stay. But I think it came down to what is the talent around him. I don't think that he felt comfortable with the playmakers around him. I think he initially said he was going to stay, hoping they'd get a wide receiver, they'd get an offensive lineman. I think he was kind of waiting to see what tools were going to be brought in. And then at the time it came for almost the start of spring practice, he's going, oh, I don't know. I'm not real comfortable what's around me. So at that point, I think he just made the decision that he just wasn't sure. So now he had to leave. And he left kind of at the end of the whole cycle where people were in the portal. So he didn't have a ton of options. So it would have made sense for him to go sooner. But I think he was trying to give ASU the benefit of the doubt and seeing what tools they were going to bring in around him.
And so just very quickly before Mark asks a question, the Gentry and Pearsall departures probably were the straw that broke the camel's back in this regard. Would that be fair to say?
I believe he was in the portal before those happened.
Oh, okay.
So Gentry was entirely an NIL-driven thing. His family is not very well off. I heard he got 6 figures, maybe 650, close to 700,000 worth of NIL. I don't have anything firm on that. So you can't blame the kid in that respect. I wouldn't blame the kid either. He can set up his family for life. I don't blame the kid. Gentry took part in spring practice, and there has never been an indication that he wasn't happy here. He was going to be a starter next year as a sophomore, probably moving into the spot that Darian Butler was in last year. So there would have been no reason for him to leave if it wasn't something like NIL. With Pearsall, I think it might be a little bit of a different situation. I think that might be more a product of not sure about the offense and not sure who was going to be the quarterback. So I don't think Pearsall's move was necessarily NIL driven. I think that might have been more of a personnel driven decision. And with every kid, it's different.
Sure.
Michelle, there are some components to the NCAA investigation that are somewhat unprecedented because these infractions occurring during the pandemic. And in terms of that factoring into the perceived severity of it. Well, the Pac-12 took the pandemic more seriously than every other conference in college football. That obviously is, though, being investigated by the NCAA. Is there a feel for how severe this case is being judged and what the expectations of what the penalties could be or should be?
I kind of haven't gotten a gauge on that. Now, I know that ASU is going to say they've cleaned house pretty much with most of the coaching staff that was involved in all of that. I wouldn't be surprised. Who knows if they're going to qualify for a bowl this year or not. It's not really looking like it right now, but maybe they self-impose that bowl ban if they do qualify. So I think they're going to do what they can to mitigate things, but it's kind of hard to tell right now.
Herm Edwards obviously is a guy that is very unique in college football because of his charisma, his ability to connect with both the media and with young people various ages. This has been a strong suit of his been his ability to win people over. What has he said during the midst of all this? How much responsibility has he taken? How has he framed what has happened, and how much blame has he taken on, and what steps does he believe the program should take, or is he committed to ensure that these sorts of things don't happen in the future?
Well, he basically says what you'd expect him to say. There was one press conference during the spring where he was, pretty much, I think it was a TV reporter that kind of went after him pretty good in availability, and he kind of skirted the subject. Basically, he just said, "I'm the coach. I'm going to lead this team," and I don't think he didn't necessarily take any responsibility per se, but I wouldn't expect him to do that. He'd just say, "Hey, we're going to work with the people that are in the building. If players want to leave, let them leave. If coaches are going to leave, they're going to leave. They're going to move on, and we're going to operate with the people that are in this building." And he pretty much said what you would expect him to say. The one thing about Herm, like you said, I needed him a few weeks ago, and I texted him and said, "Herm, I need you for 5 minutes. Can you call me back?" He called me back right away. A month before that, he was on vacation in Carmel. He called me back from vacation when I need, so he's great from my standpoint. There's nobody better. Herm is great. But yeah, I just think that he's trying to give an even keel message to the players. He's trying to, he doesn't want them too much thinking about all the off the field stuff. He's just trying to toe the line, and he basically is saying what you would expect him to say, which is not really, because he can't really talk about it. He's not gonna talk about it.
Michelle Gardner joining us. She has a number of times here at the Voice of College Football. You can join Michelle's work there at Arizona Republic, covering Arizona State athletics. You both alluded to this earlier, the obvious challenges in recruiting when you've got this type of situation hanging over your head. Looking at the commitment list, it's only June. We've got 6 months, but still you can start to, with all the camps and all the recruiting official and unofficial visits going on across the country, this is a time where we see them start to flood in, and we see Arizona State for 2023 with one hard commit. Most teams are in the 8 to 10 range. Should we be reading into that, or is that exactly what you're talking about?
Well, they've had a number of kids on campus. They've had a ton of visits. I think a lot of people are going to wait and see maybe if this thing plays out before the end of the season. And hey, there's always the transfer portal if all else fails. There are plenty of players in the transfer portal. So, I think if you're an ASU fan, you would have been worried about it before this transfer portal thing, because the high school ranks were the only place you could build your team. But, I think they've done a pretty good job through the portal this year. They are going to be thin at several different positions, but they've actually brought in guys that were starters in other programs at some key positions. So I wouldn't read too much into it yet.
All right, Michelle, let's look forward to not just the 2022 season, but really to like the next 2-3 years of football. And I know that, the Pac-12 is almost certain to get rid of divisions, but we still have the framework of the Pac-12 South, and you do have regional competitors. And I think one of the big questions that's likely to emerge in Pac-12 South football in the next 2 years or so, could be after this season, is Kyle Whittingham potentially retiring after the 2022 season, because he has this loaded Utah team picked to go to the college football playoff by some outlets. It would be the natural jumping off point for Whittingham, who has a family, wants to spend more time with his grandkids. So if Kyle Whittingham retires after the 2022 season, how do you, and we could have ASU making a coaching change before 2023. have you thought about some of the coaching carousel plot twists and maybe the things that Michael Crow needs to think about in terms of how he repositions the ASU program and what this program is capable of? Because obviously, as you know well, Jed Fish is recruiting up a storm in Tucson. He's showing signs of building back that program. I think most people would say that Arizona is in a better position right now than Arizona State, which is really hard to put into context when you think about the 70-7 debacle and the Kevin Sumlin exit. So with the Whittingham plot point, with Arizona gaining momentum under Fish on the recruiting trail, just what do you think needs to be the big picture vision for Arizona State as it imagines, what this program can be in the 2020s?
I think it's really hard to have any clue where things are going to go until the dust settles with this thing. I mean, I got no idea, really. It's just there are too many variables here. I think Arizona State is still a pretty good spot for a good coach, whether, no matter who it is. And my guess is that maybe Herm's not here after this season, assuming we get some sort of semi-resolution, like at least a notice of allegations at this point. I think Arizona State, is it ever going to be a Utah or Oregon? No. But I also don't think it's going to be bottom of the barrel either. I think there's potential here. And I think athletes would want to play here. There's a lot of good reasons for them to want to play here. So I think this thing has to be resolved before we can see how ASU plays out.
All right. Arizona State coming off an 8-5 season, but a lot of uncertainty entering 2022. They go to the LA Coliseum on October 1st to face USC. Michelle, we appreciate you stopping by. Matt, did you have anything else for Michelle?
I didn't, but just great to talk to you, and thanks for joining the program here in Phoenix.
Well, I'm going to say this. A lot of the reporters have kind of talked about what we think this team can do. And before they lost Gentry and Lole, we were thinking maybe a 500. I think the defense has up front enough talent that maybe the defense can make them hang in there. I think the success of this team all depends on quarterback. And I'm assuming it's going to be Emory Jones. I don't think they would have went out during the summer and gotten another quarterback if they thought one of the 5 in their camp could do the job. So I'm assuming it's going to be Emory Jones. But I think the success of this team is all going to depend on how Emory Jones does.
And I would think that most college football observers would take Jaden Daniels over Emory Jones, but it's not by a huge margin. It's not a huge drop in play from those two quarterbacks. And Jaden Daniels not coming off the best season with 10 TDs and 10 picks last year as well. Michelle, we appreciate you stopping by. And again, everybody check out Michelle's work at Arizona Republic. Thanks, Michelle.
Anytime.
All right. Once again, Michelle at the Arizona Republic covering the Sun Devils. And boy, a lot to unpack there as we head toward 2022 and a lot of uncertainty. We'll know more when the two teams get together in October.
Yeah, and I would just point out before we transition to other topics that, before this NCAA storm hit ASU, the USC ASU game was, an anticipated event, but this year, this is one of the automatic W's for the Trojans. I'm writing it in. There's zero doubt that USC is going to post a 40 burger on Arizona State. It's going to be a 45-21 type game. I'm just chalking that one up, and that's a testament to how far Arizona State has fallen.
Folks, we appreciate you being here. We have revved up USC football talk here live with Matt over the last 6 weeks. We had Matt on each and every week prior to that, but thought, hey, let's go live. Let's give the opportunity to take comments and questions from all of you. And it's been a good time for the past 6 weeks. Bring your college football fans, friends who are fans of any team, into our discussion each and every Tuesday at 4 Eastern and 1 where it counts. They're on the West Coast, 1 Pacific time. Matt, we went through the Lincoln Riley conversation with Dennis Dodd that you raised to me before we came on the air here. We sampled the Oklahoma audience and on our Oklahoma show, which is coming up this Friday. on our OU channel. And I'm expecting the angle, the perspective, the narrative from the live chat here to be slightly different than what we experienced the other day on the Oklahoma channel.
Slightly. Yeah. I would say that, when Lincoln Riley said he didn't have, the best roster in the playoff, that it was, third at best of the four, I don't think he was way off the mark. And I also don't think he was throwing his players under the bus. Like, that's a criticism I've seen from Oklahoma fans. No, it just meant that Alabama and Clemson had better rosters. That's what that is. That's not, taking the sledgehammer to your own players and the caliber of players that you had. Now, I think where he's incorrect, I think in 2017, the 2018 Rose Bowl against Georgia, Oklahoma did not have inferior talent. And you saw that. You saw that with the 31-14 lead. You saw that with taking Georgia into overtime. You saw that with scoring over 40 on a Kirby Smart defense. That was an elite offensive line that Oklahoma had. It was able to stand up to Georgia's front seven. Oklahoma did not have deficient or inferior talent that year. Now, in 2018 and 2019, yes, that was the Grand Canyon size gap, and Alabama and LSU threw OU around the field like a dirty old rag. In those two cases, yes. But in 2017, Oklahoma was not the third or fourth most talented team in the Final Four. Let's also keep in mind in 2017, Oklahoma was better than Clemson. That was the Kelly Bryant Clemson team. I would have taken Oklahoma over that Clemson team because Kelly Bryant would not have been able to keep up with Oklahoma over the course of 60 minutes. Baker Mayfield certainly would have been able to beat him. And Alabama, of course, got the fortunate draw playing Clemson in the semis instead of Oklahoma or Georgia, who are better teams that particular year. So Lincoln Riley is partly correct, but I don't agree with him in the 2017 portion of his statement saying that Oklahoma was at best the third most talented team in the playoff, not in 2017.
So what happens in these situations is what the head coach in this case has to say. That gains the headlines, and that's what everyone talks about, and not necessarily looking into what was asked, what was the context of the conversation, all of those things. So did Lincoln Riley really need to state that his team was third or fourth best in the playoffs in those particular years? Because I don't think that that's a comment that needs to be made myself. He's right. I don't think he's incorrect in his evaluation of his team, but I do think it's a slight on his team.
Maybe, and I think you could certainly make the argument, but I certainly agree with you. What is the point? What is the purpose? Like, how does he translate that into something positive? I guess the only thing that he could do as a result of saying that was, well, I learned at Oklahoma that I need to recruit at a higher level if I want to have one of the two most talented teams in a future college football playoff. I guess that would be the only real way Lincoln Riley turns that into a positive. It turns it into a motivating factor for him. But yeah, why do you say that about the place you just left? Like, it's certainly not going to make anybody feel good. And of course, you do have this situation where Lincoln Riley is making this explanation tour. He also talked to ESPN's Chris Lowe this past week, gave an interview about the exit at Oklahoma. And so he's saying, well, I could have handled this better, could have done a better job, could have been a smoother process. And yet he's making this comment to Dennis Dodd about his Oklahoma rosters not measuring up. So, that's just going to create more hurt feelings. That itself is not really doing the best job in terms of detaching himself from Oklahoma, moving on with the next chapter. This is just going to perpetuate questions about the Oklahoma side, which Lincoln Riley, at least theoretically, is trying to get away from. He's trying to create this clean slate at USC. So he does seem to be defeating the purpose of this media tour, talking to all these prominent national reporters. The point is to make things quiet down at Oklahoma, to reduce the temperature in the room at Oklahoma. Didn't do that with these remarks, especially that remark to Dennis Dodd.
I basically see it as if you're stating that you had the third or fourth best roster out of a 14 playoff, then you are washing your hands of any responsibility of coaching those teams to victories. You're basically saying, I couldn't coach them to wins. We weren't good enough.
I think he's certainly saying that the deck was stacked against him because you had, Saban and Dabo with the superpowers at their height. Also, 2019 LSU, arguably the most talented team in college football history, or at least alongside 2001 Miami, 1995 Nebraska, one of the true juggernauts of the sport. But yeah, you could say that it's just about the other team having the better players. But other people are certainly going to read into it in a different way. It's certainly, he's leaving the issue open. Instead of closing the door on these topics, which is ostensibly the point of this media tour, he's actually just leaving the box. He's leaving the door open, and he's perpetuating the questions instead of ending them. And so I don't think that he's achieving the goals that he probably had in mind. Now, one could raise the alternative point that this media tour with ESPN and CBS is just to keep USC in the news cycle in the off season, because no one wanted to talk about USC in the past several off seasons under Clay Helton. So Lincoln Riley is filling that vacuum here in the month of June. Maybe that's the purpose. And if that's the case, okay, he achieved his goal and he did something positive. Like, he's just getting USC in the news cycle. He knows that Chris Fowler and Kirk Herbstreit are going to call several of his games this year after having absolutely nothing to do with USC the previous few years. So if he just wants to create like an ownership of the calendar, kind of an NFL model that, own the calendar wherever the time of year it is, make publicity, get your name out there. If that's his goal, and maybe it is, then he's succeeding. But if he wants to close the door on his Oklahoma years, start fresh, no, he is not achieving that goal with these interviews. Let's just be honest about that.
So that is the comment that stood out to me regarding the past. The comment that stood out to me regarding him setting expectations was by separating USC and Oklahoma in regards to what is possible, what's achievable, what the levels are, and he's distinguishing USC as a better program than Oklahoma, basically saying we can achieve anything here. That wasn't necessarily the case in the past in Norman. So he's setting himself up for, okay, here's the bar. It's raised mighty high, and it already was. But again, I don't know that he's doing himself a lot of favors.
Yeah, the other comment we need to touch on, Mark, because it was obviously a very splashy quote, was, I wasn't running from the SEC. I was running to USC. So he's saying that he wasn't scared. And I guess as a coach, you have to say something like that, to project toughness, to project, embracing an opportunity, as opposed to being frustrated perhaps behind the scenes with Oklahoma's move to the SEC. Last year when the machinery of that move was revealed and it became announced. So maybe you just want to talk tough. And obviously as a coach, you do want to do that to a certain extent. But, it's once again, by saying, well, I wasn't running from the SEC, people are going to keep saying, well, actually, yes. Like, it's an old debate tactic, right? You don't mention the topic. When you're trying to refute an argument, you don't bring up the actual topic. You have to speak around it. And Lincoln Riley didn't really follow that particular point of advice. He would be best served by going, who? What? I'm just focused on the challenge at USC. Shouldn't have mentioned the SEC. Shouldn't be mentioning Oklahoma. It should just be USC and this grand new challenge I have here. So purely in political terms, in terms of finessing the conversation, in terms of manipulating the argument, Lincoln Riley is not checking all the boxes. And that's definitely, he's still in his late 30s. So that's an area where he still has to learn how to message very effectively. He's not hitting it right on the mark here.
Because we both know, regardless of what he says, he's not going to swing a lot of people are going to be dead set to say the SEC is the best. You could have had the LSU job. You're running they're not going to be swayed one way or the other. But there is a large portion of the college football fan base that if you did what you're recommending, you leave that alone and you focus on building up USC and convincing people, would you not want to go here? So I had the choice, and I wanted USC glory and tradition and potential and glamour and glitz and sun and beat. I'm not stating anything concerning anything else.
Totally agree. Like Lincoln Riley, not only mentally, but also in terms of what he says publicly, he needs to cut the cord. Like that needs to be very intentional and front of mind for him. Like he should just be talking about USC. 100% agree. And I think we can very much agree on that.
Talking USC football with all of you. We love the Trojans fans being here, but we've got all sorts of other fan bases repped in the live chat. So please leave your comments and questions, and we will answer those.
Tim. All right. Our friend Tim Prangley, he mentioning that Lincoln Riley didn't bring up the topic. He refuted it. Okay. He was asked a question. That is entirely true. But like there's a way to answer questions with a maximum level of effectiveness. So, you know, you like Bill Belichick, right? You know, we're on to Cincinnati. You know, we're on to the next game. You know, Bill Belichick, say whatever you want about him in terms of like how you like him as a person, but he has that tunnel vision focus. When he gets asked a question at a press conference, maybe he's a jerk about it, all right, but we're on to the next game, you know. So he doesn't mention those other side topics. He doesn't step in that pothole. Lincoln Riley didn't have to actually enunciate the term SEC in his answer. Yes, he was refuting a point that Dennis Dodd was bringing up. Yes, of course. Like it wasn't Riley's own idea to speak about this. He was asked about it by a journalist. We get that. But there is a way to answer the question with a maximum of effectiveness. He shouldn't be uttering the letters SEC. He shouldn't be uttering the word Oklahoma. He should be crafting his answers to very intentionally, very purposefully avoid mentioning parts of his past, outside competitors. He should know how to answer questions solely through the prisms of USC and the Pac-12. That is the specific point. So a little bit of politics here on a June Tuesday here at the Voice of College.
Yes, I am searching for. There's certainly a lot of there is certainly a lot of opinion here, but nothing that we've have not covered here regarding Lincoln Riley's comments to the media here in recent days. There was a post by one of the outlets. I saw it on CBS Sports, and obviously with all the talent acquisition and the starting two wide receivers, really what should be the three biggest threats on the field on the perimeter for USC, Jordan Addison, Mario Williams, and Brendan Rice, that USC suddenly has gone from missing Drake London and not having anyone to replace him to what could be the top wide receiver room in college football.
One of the interesting things about this topic, Mark, is that there's a website, Sports Pac-12, which rates all the players and position groups in the Pac-12 conference. An analyst, Jack Folman, is someone we've had on our Trojans Wire in-house podcast several times, extremely knowledgeable about Pac-12 athletics, particularly football. And in Jack's Pac-12 preseason wide receiver rankings for 2022, he obviously had Jordan Addison as the best receiver in the Pac-12. That's pretty much a slam dunk. He had Gary Bryant at number 2. That was an eye popper. So like Mario Williams was also in the top 5, but he had Gary Bryant at number 2. And so it brings up the point that there are the big splashy names, but a lot of people who follow USC football are convinced that USC's 3rd, 4th, 5th receivers are very much up to the task. It's not just going to be the Jordan Addison show with Mario Williams in a supporting role. There are going to be lots of supporting actors out here in Hollywood who will have a chance to impress the audience, and Gary Bryant being one of those. But like the other point to make here is that we saw several different receivers get involved in that spring game back on April 23. We saw Terrell Bynum, make a great catch on an impressive Caleb Williams throw. We saw Kyle Ford make a catch on what was Miller Moss's best throw as USC's backup quarterback playing in that game. Caleb Williams memorably threw completed passes to 5 different receivers on the first drive touchdown in that spring game. So I think that really is the bigger story. Jordan Addison's going to grab the headlines. Mario Williams, also a very splashy transfer as well. But a lot of people who follow the Pac-12 think that USC has like 5 or 6 solid, dependable receivers. And so that in many ways is the ultimate strength of the group. Jordan Addison, an elite player, no question about it. But USC is really deep at this particular position.
Every so often, Matt, I see an opportunity for me to stick up for Clay Helton. So I'm going to take it up right here.
You do know the risk that you're taking here, right?
Especially with you and the other. I can do it on a solo video and maybe
Sure.
snow some people over. But I'm going to stick up for him right here, just in regards to the offensive line is supposed to be one of the best in the country, correct? The depth is the issue.
It's supposed to be
starting
like
5.
The starters are supposed to be very good. Yes. I don't know about best in the country, but they're supposed to be very
one
good.
Of the best.
Sure.
One of the 10 best in the
starters
country.
The starters are expected to be very good as long as they stay healthy. Yes.
And he recruited and signed those guys.
Yes, he did.
Okay. All right. Just
it also took a while for them to develop.
Very good. Very good.
The USC fan base here in the Voice of College Football is gonna crush me if I don't push back against Clay Helton praise at every possible point.
That's not praise. I'm just clarifying a point that he did have some nice recruiting classes. 2 of them cratered just to unbelievable degrees for a USC program.
Sure, but then came the player development side. Now, I will say that hiring Clay McGuire to coach within the air raid system, that was a good move. But that's a move he should have made at the beginning of when he brought Graham Harrell in. He had 2 years with Graham Harrell, an air raid offensive coordinator, and he didn't have an air raid offensive line coach. So Clay Helton was late to the party on that, and that's why a few seasons slipped away from USC. So even when Clay Helton did something good, he still didn't pull it off the right way.
So Matt, I don't know that we've addressed with all the Lincoln Riley talk since day one with you, and of course we talked to Matt even before Lincoln Riley took the job, but in terms of the live shows here, we haven't really, at least I haven't heard from you. I've certainly had my many comments on various platforms assessing his stay at Oklahoma, because you can take 2 sides, 2 general sides, and I think there's truth on both sides. One would be he inherited a top 10 program. He won a lot of games. He failed, and sometimes miserably, in big games on big stages, though, against the elite of college football. So those would be the knocks against him. He did not significantly improve the defense, whether find a defensive coordinator who would significantly upgrade it to, I don't want to say elite. That would be maybe a bit of a stretch of what you could do with a Big 12 defense, but something in the top 25 range nationally, something like that. That's the negative narrative. The positive is that he upgraded recruiting at Oklahoma. He was handed a program that was strong, but not excelling, not continuing to move the needle and trajectory on the upswing, and he moved it in that direction. He came within a whisker of beating Georgia, the team that could have won a national championship at the Rose Bowl in 2017. He certainly infiltrated the program with all sorts of high-end players on the offensive side, developed quarterback play that was unprecedented for that period of time in college football. And probably lastly, he dominated the conference. So national pundits and fans would point to the inability on the big stage and only count those as big games, but to win conference championship after conference championship and all the key games against the best teams in his own conference, he consistently did that.
Yeah, it's an always fascinating conversation because it has some parallels, to other sports. Like when you look at Lincoln Riley having to go against the Alabama Clemson axis with Nick Saban and Dabo at the height of their powers, it's a lot like what men's tennis has been the past 20 years with Djokovic, Nadal, Federer. So anyone outside of that axis of supreme elite power gets put in the shadows of those elites. And like, not everybody's Nick Saban or Dabo. I mean, they set the bar so absurdly high, set such an absurd standard that, when measured against those two, you're always going to fall short. And so Lincoln Riley could be viewed as, well, just part of everybody else, that he couldn't break through that wall of Alabama Clemson supremacy. But he was pretty much better than just about everyone else. The Ohio State being an exception under Ryan Day, the Buckeyes were able to make a national championship game, were able to beat Trevor Lawrence and Travis Etienne in a playoff semifinal and do it pretty soundly with Justin Fields. But for the most part, Lincoln Riley was better than all but 2 or 3 programs in his stay at Oklahoma. And so naturally, with USC and the Pac-12 both having long college football playoff droughts, that's a question that's going to hang over him until he answers it. Now, I would say that, being an 11-win program, 12-win program, on a regular basis, as he was at Oklahoma, winning those conference championships, let's consider, some other situations. Let's consider what USC was for most of Clay Helton's tenure. Other than the 2 years when Sam Darnold rescued the program, USC was not even, good. USC was, average and sometimes well below average. Certainly last year, USC hit rock bottom, also had an atrocious 2018 season. Look at Texas. Look at what Texas has gone through, cycling through coaches, Tom Herman, Sark, and now also had the bad Charlie Strong years as well. I mean, Texas has, been immiserated, for the past 10 years or so. And so when you look at Lincoln Riley's body of work at Oklahoma, it shouldn't be just viewed in a vacuum or relative to Saban and Dabo. It should be compared to places such as Texas, places such as Michigan, where Jim Harbaugh had the hardest time for several years breaking through. So when you look at various national situations, not just what Saban's doing in Tuscaloosa, what Dabo has done at Clemson. And a side note, we'll see if the Dabo empire, it really still has a firm foundation this year. That empire could be on the wane. We will see about that. But that, to me, is the most compelling question of this season, even more than Lincoln Riley at USC. Because, if Clemson has slippage, that has major ramifications for the rest of the sport. But anyway, I look at Lincoln Riley's body of work at Oklahoma very favorably. Oklahoma fans would be technically correct to say that each Oklahoma team was slightly worse each year, that the 2017 team was clearly the best, and 2018 was slightly worse, and 2019 was slightly worse, and 2020 was slightly worse. But they were all conference champions. They were all playing in big-time bowl games. And so having that level of consistency measured against a Texas, measured against a Nebraska, measured against a Michigan, measured against all these other programs which have
Miami
fluctuated in their results,
Florida State.
Absolutely. That's really kind of the big picture, which says, wait a minute, we can find flaws in Lincoln Riley. He's not God. He's not a Messiah, but he's pretty darn good. I mean, if he's an Olympic bronze medalist, that's essentially what he's been, with Saban having gold and Dabo having silver. It's not that bad in a larger picture. It's still a very, very high standard, and hopefully he can take it to the next level at USC. And that means winning the playoff semifinal, playing for national championships.
Yeah, it's a fascinating topic, no doubt. And, while each of those teams through that series of years from 2017 on decreased in its quality,
it wasn't by much.
It wasn't by much. It wasn't by much. No. So we will see now with just a different set of components to work with, location, recruiting footprint, facilities, all of it, how that opens up for him from here on out. Yeah.
And I think the only other point to make here is that, another big plot point for the 2022 season is how Spencer Rattler performs down in South Carolina. Like if he has a big year, that'll raise some questions about Lincoln Riley. But even with that having been said, Lincoln Riley, when he had the Cadillac quarterback, Baker, Kyler Murray, Jalen Hurts, his offense rocked and rolled. And he has that Cadillac quarterback with Caleb Williams. One could say that in 2020 with Spencer Rattler, that Oklahoma looked uniquely vulnerable to a degree it hadn't previously under Lincoln Riley. But we know that Caleb Williams is the real deal. I mean, I don't think anyone disputes that. So you give Lincoln Riley a real deal quarterback, his offenses max out when he has, a top tier quarterback. So, you can poke some holes in Lincoln Riley, but getting his offense to roar when he has the right quarterback, that ain't one. That is not a place where you can criticize Lincoln Riley. So, yeah, I'm definitely a believer. I'm definitely sold on him. Definitely think he's a top 5 coach in college football. Some analysts put him outside the top 5. Some analysts put him behind Ryan Day, behind Luke Fickell. Yeah, I'm not one of them. I have him as a top 5 coach behind Saban, Dabo, Kirby. I would, slot him in at 4 or 5. So I'm definitely a believer in Lincoln Riley. And that would exist, by the way, people watching on the Voice of College Football, that would exist whether he was at USC, whether he was at Oklahoma, whether he was with the Dallas Cowboys, no matter where he was. I'm sold on his ability to coach offense.
I'm having difficulty keeping these points in my head until I've got a shot here, but I believe I got them here. So one would be that to get the take from Oklahoma fans is inconsequential at this point because their viewpoint's so skewed that if we would get a reasonable Oklahoma fan to comment on Lincoln Riley today versus what he would have said the day before he took the USC job, they're night and day. The evaluation of the job that he did there and the slant on it. So that's inconsequential. Number 2, it is interesting to get the Oklahoma feedback. We had a series of guys on that have an Oklahoma channel on a couple of weeks ago, and to get their take, because I have always given Lincoln Riley a lot of credit for the Georgia performance in the Rose Bowl. They think that he had the foot on the throttle and on the neck, and then he made a number of blunders that led to Georgia coming back in that game.
The squib kick right before halftime, which gave Georgia a field goal, and then the big one, though, not going for it on 4th down and half a yard in overtime, trusting his offensive line to score a touchdown. That's the biggest single in-game error in terms of a tactical decision that he's ever made, period.
And we'll also keep in mind, as you were plucking some narratives across college football that are somewhat connected and making some program comparisons, it's going to be inseparable in regards to comparing USC versus Oklahoma and specifically Riley versus Venables going forward and what they're able to accomplish.
No doubt.
Matt, thank you so much for making this show happen. Matt Zemek, Trojans Wire. Get on over there. Check out Matt's work. Is there anything in particular that you're working on?
We're continuing USC's new recruiting progress. And of course, there are going to be a lot of visits in June. So just staying on top of that. Other than that, pretty quiet, but we're planning some big things for July and August. You can better believe it. With this being the first season for Lincoln Riley, got some special things planned for the summer. Looking forward to it.
There you go. Tim says it much more with flavor than I did. but that's where I was getting at. Right.
Why we
there.
like you, Tim.
We appreciate it. We've got an Iowa show coming up in a half hour over on the Iowa channel, 5:30 Eastern, 4:30 Central. So please check us out there. Matt, we appreciate it so much, and we will see you next week.
Have a great week, Mark. Thank you so much.